Hey everyone, I'm back as promised with another tutorial tonight. Tonight going to be focusing on the kind of grungy, oily soil that I've done for my Necromunda board. Anyways, so in front of me are the colors that I use. I basically start with a really thin base coat of Deathworld Forest, followed by shading with the Fuegan Orange, followed by Seraphim Sepia, Agrex Earthshade, and then Nuln Oil. And then I'll do a dry brush later at the end with the Deathworld Green, and then maybe some Ushopti Bone. But let's get started. So these are the brushes that I typically use. I actually purchased this large scenery brush over the weekend for the big 2x2 section. I did my last little section from a few weeks back with probably just this guy here, and it took me way too long, and I actually ended up using a lot more pots of paint than I expected. I think I used about 3 pots of paint for the section I did a couple weeks back, and it was considerably smaller than my 2x2 section that I did this weekend. And I used 1 pot of Deathworld Forest for the 2-foot section, diluted, and that was it. So I pre-mix my pot with some water. And tonight I'm going to just use this brush here because it's a small section. It's not going to be a big deal. So I've already pre-mixed this with water. It's not quite 50-50. You can see it's still quite fluid, but what I do is to add more fluidity to it, I'll just make a mess. Carefully close that. Okay, and then I've got a water pot here. And I'll just dip my brush, and I'll add the water directly to it. Now this would work really well with a zenithal style of priming as well. I've done this before with like desert basing and things like that. I did a Plague Bearer ages ago for a Dark Age of Sigmar warband, and I think it was a Painting Buddha had a really good tutorial when he was doing some Ultramarines. Anyway, so I thin my paints down a lot for basing and things like that, and with the zenithal it does pick up quite a bit, but with this particular painting tonight, the zenithal is not completely necessary because it's going to be really dark. Anyways, oops. Okay. So as you can see, I keep spreading it around a little bit. You'll want some of this black to kind of show through anyways. And it's important that you see these kind of different colorations. So like up here, it's quite a bit darker, right? And then down here, it's a little bit more green. So again, it's nice that you naturally get that the different shades by using these thin paints. If that makes sense. Again, I'm just adding a bit more water to it. I'm going to add a bit of paint here too. Okay. So the texture tonight, I'm not quite sure how this is gonna look compared to some of the rest of the different parts of my board, as I've used different textures for the soil basically everywhere. This one, I think, was more of a mix of cork dust over PVA glue. I basically bought a cheap coffee grinder, and I bought a bunch of cork sheets from the dollar store years ago, and they were on sale. And I think there was like a pack of 4 for like $3, and I ended up buying like 20 packs of them. So I have an endless supply of cork. But yeah, I basically grind up little chunks into my grinder, and it creates a really nice fine powder. I used to do that a lot with basing. It's just another tool in the arsenal for texture. I like it because it's got a really fine powdery consistency. So how I originally did this little section here was I used my heat gun to kind of, I think on low, to gently kind of carve the landscape, and then I coated the entire thing in plaster, like drywall mud, and then after that I laid down a bit of PVA glue and sprinkled on the cork dust. So I'm going back and forth. I'm mixing it in now, and now I'm just adding more water to certain areas that I find might be a touch bright, or areas that I want to darken up a little bit. So you can see by adding water, I'm kind of deleting the paint. I'm taking it away from these areas. You kind of, again, want just random patterns in it, but you also want to keep kind of to spots that make sense. Like the low points are obviously going to be a little bit darker, right? So you want to try to drag the paint away from there if you can. Okay, so I'm happy with that. I'm going to hit up the hair dryer, and then we'll be right back. Okay, so we're back. The hair dryer was used to dry my first layer. I'm going to hit one more time with my base coat, the Death World Forest Green. Just because I want to bring out the green a little bit more, I think. So I'm going to do one more coat. Okay. Just for speed of painting purposes, I'm going to make a mess like this, and then add my water. That way there's paint kind of generally in the area that I want to work in. If that makes sense. I'm getting a bit of green on my little rusty panels here, not a big deal. We'll cover it up with more rust. So when I did my my big 2x2 section, I pre-mixed one pot of paint into like a little yogurt container, and then I put in 3 parts water, and then that way I'm using my big scenery brush directly from that. Way easier. And I ended up saving a lot more paint that way. And then I do the same thing with my washes. I dilute it directly in a pot, in a larger pot. That way I can just use my big brush, and again it's just way easier. Okay, that looks good. I'm going to pause it one more time. We're going to hit it with the hairdryer, and then we'll come back and apply some washes. Alright, so now that my second coat of green is dry, I'm going to apply a layer, or a heavy shade of Fuegan Orange. Now, this again will be diluted. It's not diluted in my pot right now. This is a brand new pot. So again, what I'm going to do is just apply a heavy amount onto the area that I'm doing. Now, just to speed things up a little bit, I am going to use the big brush right now. Now I've got my pot of water on the side. I'm soaking my big brush. Okay. And I'm applying it all over. Now I use multiple washes because it kind of brings out just little layers between each coat. So the orange, you're going to get kind of a nice underlying rusty color in certain spots. Mixing that in later with the yellows, the browns, it all helps add to that really grimy look. So I'm trying to pull some of this orange out of the deeper areas just so I can kind of spread it around. I can see that some of my paint is chipped and some of the drywall plaster is showing through. Maybe I didn't do a very good job sealing that area. Again, I can fix that with a little bit of dark paint later. It's not a big deal. Okay, I'm going to hit this up with the hairdryer, and then we'll be back. Alright, we're back. It's not as orange as I would like, so I'm going to just do another quick coat. Maybe use a little bit less water in this one. I don't really have a set rule. I just say if I, if I want it darker, I just do another coat. That's pretty much it. It's not really an exact science for me. I just kind of wing it. Now this area down the road, I'm going to probably add some 2-part epoxy and make a nice little sumpy kind of wasteland pit. More garbage bags, debris, and things like that. Okay. I'm happier with this. I'm going to give it a quick hair dry, and then we'll be right back. Alright, we're back. I'm much happier now with how it looks. It's got a little bit more orange into it, and that's kind of what I was looking for. So now we're going to apply another shade of Seraphim Sepia to start this next step. Now this one is already pre-diluted, so I'm probably going to just dump a little bit on. And I'll wash it around. Same idea as before. I'm just looking to add another color tone to the dirt. Now it's not looking like a whole lot right this moment, but once we start adding that Agrax and that Null Oil, it should start to kind of pop. Alright, I'm going to hit it with a hairdryer and we'll be back. Alright, we're back. That pot that I used, I think, was a little too diluted. So I've got a new pot of Seraphim Sepia that I haven't diluted yet, and I'll just do it on the board, kind of like I usually do. Again, for terrain and doing areas like this, I'm not using a good brush by any means. This is a beat up base brush from Games Workshop. Okay. And here I'm kind of dabbing. You can brush it as much as you want, but I'm just trying to get it in all the little nooks and crannies. Okay. So this coat will darken up the green a little bit more, which is again what we're looking for. The end result isn't really going to look green at all. I've just found it's a good base coat to use for this. Okay, so that's done. I'm going to hit it with the hairdryer, and then we're going to move on to Agrax Earthshade in the recesses. Be right back. Alright, we are back. Now, I'm going to use Agrax Earthshade to darken a lot of this up. I'm not going to dilute this. It's just going to be straight from the pot, like a madman. Hopefully you don't spill any. Oops. Okay. So, just kind of doing again, just a random pattern here. Now from here, what I tend to do is blend it in. So I try to keep the central areas where I've applied my wash. I try to keep that undiluted. But what I do is I get a wet brush and then I drag the outermost part away. And that kind of just blends it. So that way you don't leave any ridge lines, I guess, when it dries. I use this technique a lot when I do my skin for my war pigs, when I apply my what is it, the Games Workshop Crackle paint, the Agrellan Earth. It's the same idea. You want to try to blend it into the surface you're applying it to, so that the transition is almost seamless. So, you know, you apply a bunch of it, and then you just wet the edge, and then you drag it around. But this way too, it leaves the high points a little bit lighter, because I didn't apply any of this typically to the high points. I try to apply this to some of the lower points, but that way the darkest of the wash settles in these low points, and then I just dab it and drag it. Okay, kind of like so. Now, because it's pooling quite a bit, I'll probably end up trying to soak up some of this, just so it's not so so dark. Okay, so I've dried my brush, and then I'm just gonna soak it up in those spots. Okay, and I'll just dab it somewhere else that could maybe use a little bit more Agrax, and then I'll repeat the process, soak it up. Okay. And voila. Okay, I'm going to pause it and use the hairdryer, and then we'll be back. Sorry, I forgot to mention, I actually don't use the hairdryer in this step. As the wash is still wet, I mix in my Nuln oil directly. Hopefully you guys didn't use your hairdryer already. And again, this is just right from the pot. Now, I don't have a problem dipping my brush back in because I'm using this all for terrain right now, and it'll get used up. It's not really going to add really much of a difference in terms of discoloration. It's pretty minor. So this is when it starts to really look oily and really grungy. Okay. So same idea as before. Now we've just added some Nuln oil to the mix. You can see the back here, my soil kind of turns up. So I want to make this surface a little bit darker as well, while keeping the very top ridge lighter. Okay, my pools here, again, I kind of work them in, grab any excess, give it a little dab here and there. So the idea behind this look for me is that just picture all of those corroded pipes, the factory, the flooring, everything in the surrounding areas. Now picture that just slowly or quickly, corroding and rusting away. That typically will seep into the soil that it's in contact with. So the soil is going to kind of take on the colors of the rusting materials and things like that. Okay. So right now it's still pooling quite a bit in the back here. So I'm going to soak up a little bit of it. And I'm going to hit it up with a hairdryer now, and we'll see what it looks like after we're done. Alright, we're back. I'm going to give one final pass with Null Oil to really accentuate the high points by applying some in the base of the ridge on either side. And again, little holes here and there. I'll apply the same kind of technique I did with the Agrax, so I'll apply it straight from the pot at the base. Now you can tell I switched brushes to a little bit, a slightly more controlled brush. Okay. Once I get to the other side of the ridge, you'll see it a little bit better. So I'm going to rinse my brush. Now it's got a little bit of water on it. I'm going to try to hit just that leading edge of the Null Oil and drag it away. And this will kind of blend it in nicer. Okay, now we're going to do the other side. The same idea. Now I just kind of try to focus on one little section at a time so the wash doesn't dry up on me. And again, I try to drag it away. Oops. Like so. Okay. I'll do another little section over here. There's another little hump, and now these also, again, accentuate the little plateaus that you have in your dirt or your landscaping or whatever. Now it's hard to kind of tell from the angle I guess the camera's at right now, but once I outline it I think you can see it a little bit better. The camera angle also tonight isn't really doing this soil justice, I find. Oh well. Anyways. There's a little piece there, little ridge here. Okay. I also think it's just that the texture of this little area that I've done. It lacks my usual texture, I guess. It's not as coarse and gritty, but I did that because I knew I was going to fill most of this up with a 2-part epoxy, so I didn't really bother going overboard with the texture when I knew it was just going to get covered up. But when you do have more texture, it does make it a little bit more fun, a little bit easier. Okay, so at the back, on this side here, same idea. There's the soil kind of ramps up to the Zone Mortalis tiles. A little bit, not by much, maybe about a 1/4 inch or so. But again, I'm going to apply the Nuln Oil to the base of that slight incline. Wet my brush, dab the bottom of it, and then drag it away. More water. Now, because we're using paints and washes that are so thin, and then if you're using the hairdryer to speed it up, keep in mind that if you're not careful, you will slowly or quickly eat away at the previous paint layer. Now with the dirt, I don't mind, because again it just exposes a little bit more of the previous layer. I try not to do it, but if it happens, it happens. You can always touch it up after. Okay, there's a little ridge on this side of this deep crater that connects to this ridge that we first started on. Okay, looking good. Little divot here. Yeah, it's funny, the camera angle's not doing this justice right now. I will take a picture of this after it's done. But this is kind of when it starts getting a little bit more fun too. Because you get to kind of control how dark, how light you want it in certain areas. I'll go back to this back ridge here. Okay. All right. I'm going to hit it up with a hairdryer and then we'll be right back. Alright, we're back. I'm going to do a dry brush now. A really light dry brush with Death World Forest Green. I'm going to use my large scenery brush. Probably more of an overbrush at this point. There's really not a whole lot of paint going on. Oops. Sorry, I'm just getting the excess off my brush here. So I use a piece of cardboard, and I'm just trying to blend it into the brush so that there's not a whole lot going on to the soil. I think that's good. This brings some of the green tones back to the surface. And then when that one's done, I'm going to throw a little bit of Ushopti bone back on top. And I mix that onto the palette or the piece of cardboard as well. That'll lighten up the green even further. Okay, so that's done. I'm going to turn the camera off and we're going to try to get a better angle with the for a picture here. Alright, so here's a bit better of a video picture of what we just did tonight. I did turn the exposure down a little bit. The light is not really helping me out. Yeah, so here it is. I find it, I think it looks pretty good. Again, it looks a little different than what I've done for the rest of my table, just because, again, this particular section doesn't have nearly as much texture as the other areas. So it's, but it's the same colors. It's the exact same way that I've done everything else. The excavation site that I'm working on, that was the first area that I did when I started on this table, and it was just a really weird mix of adhesives and materials that went into making that. I don't think I'd ever do that again. It really off-gassed for quite some time. I wasn't really expecting it to be that bad. The second recessed area, I used a lot more sand and flock and things like that. I'm pretty happy with how that turned out. And again, the sand really soaks in all of the washes and things like that, so it was a lot of fun to work on that area. But yeah, like I said, this area is getting epoxy. It'll be some water features, so I'm not really going to see a lot of this stuff. You can see the brush strokes and things like that. Again, I don't think you're really going to see that by the time I'm done. Anyways, I hope you all enjoyed it. Again, any questions, feel free to leave a comment. Like and subscribe my videos, and if you're not following me on Instagram, you can do so at hobby.dad, and I post lots of my progress for all my current projects, all very grim dark for the most part. Anyways, hope you all learned something. Again, you can always send me little pictures of your examples of what you've done following my tutorials. I have seen a few people send me some pictures of their Rust attempt, and as they've kind of followed my tutorials, and they tagged me in those on Instagram, and again, they all turned out really well. So yeah, I'm happy that people are utilizing my tutorials. So anyways, have a good night, everyone. Like and subscribe, and I'll work on another one soon. Cheers.